Imagine the night sky splitting open with fire. One side of the world, in the Pacific, the calm waters of Pearl Harbor mirrored the stars, serene, silent, unsuspecting. Sailors slept in hammocks, the sound of crickets mixing with the faint hum of ship engines. On the other side, across the Atlantic, London citizens braced themselves for yet another night of pounding bombs, every heartbeat synchronized with the drone of approaching Luftwaffe planes. Two nations, oceans apart, were about to be bound together forever in blood and fire. You can almost hear it. The sirens screaming in London as families rush into shelters, dust raining down from collapsing brick. The sudden roar of aircraft engines over Hawaii, black shadows swooping like hawks out of the sunrise. The world, in that one dawn, seemed to tilt into chaos. This is the story of the darkest morning of World War II, a morning when America, burned at Pearl Harbor and Britain, bled under London skies. You'll walk with the sailors, the civilians, the generals. You'll feel their dread, their courage, their shock. And by the end, you'll understand how this single dawn changed the war, and changed the world forever. Stay with me, because what happened next would rewrite history. The calm before the fire the night before December 7, 1941, was deceptively peaceful in Hawaii. The island air carried the sweet scent of hibiscus. The ocean waves lapped gently against the shore. And for the men of the U.S. Pacific Fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor, it was just another Saturday night. Some were laughing in bars, others writing letters home, and many were already asleep, unaware that within hours, their world would be torn apart. Imagine yourself as a young sailor aboard the USS Arizona. You lie back in your bunk, eyes heavy from a long day of drills. The steel around you feels invincible, massive guns above deck, armor plating beneath your feet. This is America's pride, you think, a floating fortress? You have no reason to imagine that by sunrise, this very steel will become a coffin for you and your shipmates. Meanwhile, halfway across the world in London, the mood was different but equally tense. The city had been enduring nightly air raids for over a year. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble, churches blackened by fire, and families torn apart by sudden explosions. Yet the people of London had learned to live with the fear. They carried on, working by day, sheltering by night. Defying Hitler's attempt to crush their spirit on this particular night, the skies above Britain were clear, perfect for the Luftwaffe's bombers. Families huddled in underground stations, clutching children close. The air smelled of damp concrete and smoke. Some whispered prayers. Others forced themselves to sleep despite the rumbling in the distance. They didn't know how many more bombs would fall, or if their homes would still be standing by morning. Back in Hawaii, unseen and unheard, a fleet of Japanese aircraft carriers cut through the Pacific waters like sharks on the hunt. Aboard them, pilots prepared for the mission that would define their lives. They had been trained relentlessly, drilled to perfection. Each man knew his target, the ships at Pearl Harbor, the airfields, the naval base. Their commanders reminded them, strike fast, strike hard, leave no time for America to recover. The Japanese plan was daring. They believed that if they could cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet in a single blow, America would hesitate, perhaps even sue for peace. But they underestimated something far more powerful than steel or fire, the resolve of a nation once wounded. As the carriers drew closer, the pilots whispered into the night, some thinking of glory, others of family. In their pockets, many carried letters sealed with final words, ready to be sent home if they never returned. They had been told this attack would shake the world, and in their hearts, they felt the weight of history pressing upon them. At the very same hour, in London, Winston Churchill sat awake in his bunker. Cigarette smoke curled in the air as he read dispatches, his eyes tired but unyielding. He had been warning America for years, pleading for aid, knowing Britain could not stand forever alone. He must have wondered how long until the United States joined the fight. How many more British lives would it take before the great power across the Atlantic stirred from its slumber? Little did he know, within hours, the answer would arrive not in words, but in flames. The night ticked on, the seconds falling like grains of sand in an hourglass. In Hawaii, the first hint of dawn painted the horizon. Palm trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. A Sunday morning meant for church, for rest, for letters to sweethearts back home. For the men on battleships, it was routine. Some were preparing breakfast, others were cleaning decks, and a few still lay dreaming, unaware of the black wings descending from the sky. In London, however, dawn brought no peace. The Luftwaffe's bombers had come in waves during the night, and now smoke lingered over the Thames, rising from the ruins of warehouses and homes alike. Fire brigades worked tirelessly, their faces smeared with soot, their eyes red from exhaustion. Civilians emerged from shelters to find streets transformed into wastelands of twisted metal and shattered glass. Yet they carried on, women sweeping debris from their doorsteps, men queuing for rations, children clutching toys salvaged from rubble. London lived on, bruised but unbroken, and in that contrast lay the cruel symmetry of war. One nation accustomed to devastation, standing defiantly amid ruins. Another, still untouched, about to awaken to the nightmare of modern warfare. You can almost feel the stillness of Pearl Harbor's waters that morning. A mirror, smooth and calm, hiding beneath it a gathering storm. And then, like a blade tearing the sky, the first Japanese planes broke through the clouds. Engines roared. Shadows fell across the harbor. The darkest dawn had begun, but before the bombs dropped, before the explosions shook the ground, there was a silence, a single breath of time in which the world still seemed whole. Sailors looked up in confusion, their eyes narrowing at the black specks above. Civilians in London, thousands of miles away, lifted their heads to another day of smoke and ruin. And somewhere in between, history held its breath, waiting for the strike that would change everything. What do you hear first, the silence or the screams? What is the first sound of war? Is it the shriek of bombs slicing the air, the thunder of explosions, or the silence just before everything breaks apart? Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a battleship at Pearl Harbor on that quiet Sunday morning. The water reflects the rising sun, gulls circle lazily overhead, and the tropical breeze carries nothing but the scent of salt and flowers. Then you hear it. At first it is faint, almost like the buzzing of insects. But it grows louder, heavier, until you recognize the unmistakable drone of aircraft engines. You look up, and the sky is filled with black shapes descending like predators. For one heartbeat there is confusion. And then the bombs fall. The harbor erupts into chaos. The first torpedoes slice into the water, leaving trails of white foam before slamming into the sides of anchored ships. The USS Oklahoma shudders violently, her steel body twisting under the blast. The USS West Virginia is torn open, black smoke rising as sailors scream for help. The great battleships, thought to be untouchable fortresses, suddenly look fragile, helpless against the precision of the Japanese strike. Imagine being inside the belly of the USS Arizona. The men are eating breakfast, laughing at jokes, writing half-finished letters. Without warning, the ship is struck with a cataclysmic explosion. A single bomb pierces the forward magazine, and in an instant the Arizona is engulfed in fire. Flames roar upward, a column of smoke climbs thousands of feet into the air, and in that moment over 1,000 men are lost. The harbor shakes, the water churns, and the survivors can do nothing but watch as the mighty ship sinks beneath the waves, above the harbor. Japanese pilots fly with ruthless precision. They have practiced this moment countless times, and now their training unleashes devastation. Dive bombers scream downward, machine guns rake the airfields, setting rows of planes ablaze before they can even take off. Pearl Harbor's defenses crumble before they can mount a proper response. Anti-aircraft gunners scramble to their stations, firing wildly into the sky. The air fills with smoke, tracer fire, and the deafening roar of engines. Now place yourself inside a hospital near the harbor. Nurses rush to prepare for casualties, their hands trembling though their voices remain steady. Within minutes, the wounded pour in burned sailors, men staggering in shock, others carried on stretchers. The rooms echo with groans and hurried footsteps. The war, once distant and abstract, has arrived in the most brutal way imaginable. And yet, across the ocean in London, a different dawn is unfolding. Here, the people no longer ask, "Will they come?" But instead, how long will it last? The night raids have left parts of the city smoldering, but the danger is not over. The Luftwaffe's bombers are still in the skies, circling, waiting for their chance to strike again. The air is heavy with dust, the streets littered with broken glass. You can hear the all-clear sirens wailing, and for a moment Londoners dare to breathe. But they know that the next night will bring more destruction. Imagine a child clutching her mother's hand as they emerge from the underground station where they slept through the night. Above them, the morning reveals homes reduced to skeletons of brick and wood. Firefighters spray water over smoldering ruins, their boots sinking into ash. The child asks if they can go back home, but her mother has no answer, because home is gone. Yet, in the face of this devastation, life continues. People form queues for bread, buses begin to run, and shopkeepers sweep broken glass from their storefronts, determined to carry on as if nothing had changed. The irony is striking, as Britain endures night after night of terror. America, until this very morning, has lived untouched by the storm. But now, Pearl Harbor changes everything. The attack is not just a blow to ships and men. It is a strike against the illusion of safety. The Pacific Ocean no longer protects America. The war that raged in Europe and Asia has now reached her shores. Back in Hawaii, the chaos deepens. Sailors dive into oil-slicked waters, desperate to escape the inferno consuming their ships. Others cling to floating debris, the heat of flames searing their skin. Officers shout orders through the smoke, trying to rally men to fight back, but communication lines are severed and confusion reigns. Some sailors climb into small boats, rowing furiously to rescue their comrades trapped aboard burning vessels. Acts of courage erupt in every corner. Men risk their lives to pull others from fire, to carry the wounded to safety, to man the guns even as their ships sink beneath them. Up in the skies, a handful of American pilots manage to take off. Against overwhelming odds, they engage the enemy, twisting through smoke and gunfire. The roar of engines and the rattle of machine guns fill the sky. Though outnumbered, their defiance becomes a symbol. They cannot stop the destruction, but they can fight back, proving that America will not be broken in silence. And then, after 2 hours that feel like eternity, the attack subsides. The Japanese planes turn back, leaving behind a harbor transformed into a graveyard of steel and smoke. The once proud battleships lie crippled or sunk, columns of black smoke rising like funeral pyres. The water is littered with wreckage, lifeboats, and oil fires that burn bright against the morning sun. Silence slowly returns, but it is not the peaceful silence of dawn. It is the silence of devastation, of a wound that will never fully heal, thousands of miles away. Londoners read the news as they clear rubble from their streets. The headlines declare the unthinkable: America has been attacked. For Britain, weary from standing alone, this is a turning point. Churchill, upon hearing the news, is said to have breathed deeply and declared, "We have won." He knew that Britain's survival now had a lifeline. America, once hesitant, had been pulled into the war with a force too great to resist. But in that moment, in Hawaii, the people do not think of geopolitics or strategy. They think of their friends who will never rise again, of the homes destroyed, of the ordinary Sunday morning that was stolen from them forever. In London, too, families think not of grand politics but of loved ones lost in the night's raids, of empty chairs at breakfast tables, of the weary courage it takes to keep going when tomorrow promises no safety. So, what do you hear first, the silence or the screams? At Pearl Harbor, it was the silence before the bombs. In London, it was the silence after the raids. Two different silences, two different tragedies, bound together in history's cruel symmetry. And out of these silences, a storm was gathering, one that would consume the world in fire before peace could be found again. When the world awoke, did it hear the cry of war or the call of destiny? What does the world hear first in the aftermath of disaster, the cry of mourning, or the call of destiny that forces nations to rise? On December 8, 1941, as the sun rose over a smoldering Pearl Harbor, America's dawn was no longer quiet. It was filled with sirens, hammering repair crews, and the echo of Roosevelt's words forming in Washington. A nation that had tried to stay out of Europe's war now faced a choice it could not ignore. And across the ocean, in London, Churchill paced with anticipation, knowing that the attack on Pearl Harbor was not just America's tragedy, it was Britain's salvation. Imagine the scene in Hawaii that morning. The harbor still smokes, the air heavy with the stench of burning oil. Sailors and civilians wander among ruins, searching for survivors, pulling bodies from the wreckage. The once proud Pacific Fleet lies broken, the Arizona sunk in flames, the Oklahoma capsized, the California and West Virginia wounded beyond recognition. The battleships, once symbols of American might, are now monuments of grief. Men sit silently on the shore, staring out at the water, too numb to speak. For them, the war has already begun, but in Washington, war is still words. Franklin Delano Roosevelt prepares to address Congress. He has been in politics long enough to measure words carefully, but on this morning the choice is clear. His nation has been attacked. In his wheelchair, he rolls to his desk, cigarette holder clenched between his teeth, and begins dictating. His secretary types as his voice grows sharper, firmer. He wants no ambiguity. He writes, "Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy." The phrase is born not from hesitation, but from instinct. Roosevelt knows these words must ignite a fire in the American people. He has seen them divided before, uncertain about entering the war. But Pearl Harbor has united them in anger. When he delivers his speech to Congress, his voice carries not just grief, but defiance. Millions listen on the radio, their faces tight, their hearts pounding. He asks for a declaration of war, and Congress answers almost unanimously. America, the sleeping giant, has awoken. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Winston Churchill receives the news with a mixture of sorrow and triumph. In his underground bunker, surrounded by maps dotted with pins marking bombed cities and German advances, he finally sees a turning point. Britain has endured 18 months of isolation, standing alone against Hitler's fury. Now, with America entering the fight, the balance begins to shift. Churchill is said to have whispered to himself, "So, we have won after all, not because the war was over, but because Britain would no longer stand alone." But imagine the British people, weary from endless raids, learning of America's entry. Their cities are still in ruins, their nights filled with fear, yet a flicker of hope rises. The newspapers declare the news, families huddle around radios, and for the first time in months, there is the sense that the tide may turn. They imagine the industrial might of America, the endless factories, the vast armies yet to be trained. Perhaps they think relief is on its way. In Tokyo, however, the reaction is far different. The Japanese High Command celebrates the success of Pearl Harbor. They believe their daring strike has crippled America, given them the upper hand in the Pacific. Pilots are hailed as heroes, the fleet is unstoppable. Yet even in their triumph, a shadow of doubt lingers. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who planned the attack, is uneasy. He has studied America, lived in the United States, and he understands something his peers do not. America's industrial strength and national spirit, once aroused, will be impossible to contain. To his staff he utters the chilling words, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." And in that resolve lay the true turning point of the war. For Pearl Harbor was not just an attack, it was a summons. A summons for farmers, factory workers, students, and shopkeepers across America to become soldiers, sailors, and pilots. A summons for women to step into factories, for scientists to turn their genius toward war, for an entire nation to harness its vast resources toward victory. Meanwhile, London continued to burn. Even as Churchill exhaled in relief at America's entry, the city faced another night of bombs. Families retreated underground once more, children clutched toys against their chests, and rescue crews prepared for more devastation. For Londoners, Pearl Harbor was distant, but its promise was near. They knew that in time, American boots would march on European soil, American planes would join the skies above Britain, and American ships would sail the Atlantic convoys. Still, the path ahead was not immediate relief, it was escalation. Hitler, enraged by America's declaration of war on Japan, declared war on the United States. Now, the conflict that had begun as a European struggle and a Pacific war had merged into one truly global inferno. London and Pearl Harbor, though oceans apart, were now linked by a single struggle. Think of the soldiers in both lands. In Hawaii, young men enlisted by the thousands, standing in lines that wrapped around city blocks. They signed their names with determination, anger burning in their eyes. They wanted revenge for their fallen comrades, justice for the attack that had shattered their Sunday peace. In Britain, soldiers watched with relief, knowing reinforcements would soon cross the Atlantic. But they also knew the fighting would only grow fiercer. The war was no longer Britain's burden alone. It was a shared fate. The human cost, however, was already evident. In Honolulu, families mourned the sailors who never returned. Flags flew at half-mast, churches filled with grieving mothers, wives, and children. In London, funerals were a daily ritual, families laying to rest loved ones lost to bombs. The sorrow of both nations intertwined, two peoples united by loss before they were united by arms, and yet, even in mourning, a strange strength emerged. Survivors at Pearl Harbor spoke not of fear, but of defiance. Londoners, brushing dust from their clothes, joked that Hitler's bombs could not break their tea time. Out of ruin, resilience was forged. Out of fire, unity, the world had awoken, not just to the cry of war, but to the call of destiny. From that moment, the path of history bent toward a different ending. The darkest dawn had given birth to the brightest flame of resolve. But destiny is never without sacrifice. And as America prepared for war and Britain braced for more battles, one question lingered in the hearts of millions. How much more blood? How many more nights of fire would it take to reach victory? When two nations unite, do they march toward victory or into greater peril? What happens when two nations, wounded yet unbroken, clasp hands across an ocean? Do they march toward certain victory, or do they step together into even darker peril? In the days following Pearl Harbor, as the smoke still hung over Hawaii and the ashes of bombed-out homes still smoldered in London, a new chapter of the war began. It was no longer Britain's lonely struggle, no longer America's distant conflict. It had become one war, one cause, one destiny. Picture Roosevelt and Churchill together for the first time after Pearl Harbor. The American president, steady and measured, carries the weight of a nation still reeling from shock. The British Prime Minister, bulldog-like, smokes his cigar with satisfaction, his eyes gleaming with relief that his island is no longer alone. They meet in Washington in December 1941, less than 3 weeks after the attack. It is Christmas, yet the world is anything but merry. The two leaders, however, know that this alliance will decide the fate of civilization. Behind closed doors, they speak in urgent tones, voices low but filled with resolve. They plan not just to defend, but to strike back. To beat back the Axis powers not with hesitation, but with overwhelming force. But forging an alliance is not the same as wielding it. But both nations carry scars and both carry doubts. For Britain, the question is whether America will fully commit, or if this is a burst of anger that will fade into hesitation. For America, the question is whether Britain can hold on long enough for U.S. armies and ships to rise in strength. And always, the shadow of Japan looms in the Pacific, even as Hitler's Reich stretches across Europe. The Allies must fight a two-headed monster, and the battlefield spans the globe. Imagine being an ordinary American in those first weeks of war. You line up at a recruitment office, the papers still smelling of ink, your signature trembling on the page. Around you, men of all ages sign the same oath: students, mechanics, farmers, teachers. Some lie about their age to join sooner. Others say goodbye to wives and children with promises they may not keep. Trains carry new recruits to boot camps where drill sergeants strip them of civilian life and mold them into soldiers. The air is filled with the thump of boots, the bark of commands, the smell of sweat and determination. Meanwhile, on the home front, women step into roles they had never been asked to fill before. Factories hum with the clang of steel and the hiss of welding torches. Rosie the Riveter is not yet a symbol, but she is already alive in every woman who rolls up her sleeves, ties her hair back, and picks up the tools of war. The arsenal of democracy begins to awaken, and its roar will soon shake the world. across the Atlantic, Britain greets America's entry with guarded joy. The Blitz continues, though its fury has lessened since the heaviest raids of 1940. Still, cities are scarred and the people are weary. Yet the thought of American aid brings a spark of hope. Convoys of ships loaded with supplies and weapons cross the dangerous waters of the Atlantic, stalked by German U-boats. Each voyage is a gamble with death, but each arrival strengthens Britain's resolve. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen look at the growing cooperation and whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, the tide can be turned, but cooperation is not without conflict. Roosevelt and Churchill must wrestle with the grand strategy, where to strike first. Should America pour its fury into the Pacific, seeking immediate revenge against Japan? Or should they heed Churchill's plea to prioritize Europe, to defeat Hitler before Japan? Heated discussions echo in meeting rooms, maps spread across tables, arguments punctuated by cigars and cigarettes. In the end, they agree, Germany first. The Nazi war machine is the greater threat, the shadow that looms over the entire continent. Japan will be fought, yes, but Hitler must be defeated. This decision shapes everything that follows. Imagine the relief of Britain, knowing America's strength will soon reinforce Europe. Imagine also the frustration of U.S. sailors and soldiers in the Pacific, aching for revenge but told to hold the line. It is a compromise born of necessity, and it sets the stage for a long and brutal struggle. For civilians, life becomes a rhythm of sacrifice. In America, ration books appear, dictating how much sugar, butter, gasoline each family may have. The war reaches into kitchens, into wardrobes, into every small choice of daily life. In Britain, rationing has long been a reality, but now the promise of American supplies eases some burdens. Children still play in rubble-strewn streets, but now they wave at American soldiers arriving in convoys. Their accents strange, but their presence reassuring, and yet for all the unity, peril grows. In early 1942, the Japanese surge across the Pacific, taking territory after territory. In Europe, Hitler still tightens his grip, his armies pushing deep into the Soviet Union. The alliance has been born, but its strength is untested, its power not yet unleashed. Both Britain and America face long months of endurance before they can strike back. Now, imagine being a sailor on a convoy ship crossing the Atlantic. The sea is black and endless, the night filled with tension. Somewhere out there, German U-boats lurk, their periscopes slicing the waves. Suddenly, a torpedo slams into a nearby ship, a ball of fire erupting into the sky. Men scramble to lifeboats, the cold water swallowing steel and lives alike. You grip the railing, heart pounding, knowing that your ship may be next. This is the cost of alliance, brave men risking everything just to keep supplies flowing to Britain. And in London, as Churchill speaks to Parliament, his words echo the spirit of the new partnership. He declares that America's entry is the turning of the tide, but he also warns that the road ahead will be long and bloody. In Washington, Roosevelt speaks of sacrifice, of unity, of the need for every citizen to bear the weight of war. Their speeches, carried by radio waves, knit together two people separated by an ocean but bound by purpose. So, when two nations unite, do they march toward victory or into greater peril? The answer, in those early months of alliance, is both. Victory is possible now, but peril is certain. The darkest dawn of Pearl Harbor has given birth to hope, but also to a war larger and more ferocious than anything the world has ever seen. The alliance is a torch in the darkness, but it must burn brighter than the fires of the Axis if it is to survive. And as the world watches, soldiers prepare, civilians endure, and leaders plot the course of destiny. The silence before Pearl Harbor is gone, replaced by the steady drumbeat of mobilization. The war has become total, global, and inescapable. The only question left is how much darkness must be endured before the light of victory can be seen. Does the dawn of fire lead to the twilight of tyranny? When the sun rises after devastation, does it bring only more sorrow or the promise of a tyrant's fall? The dawn that began with bombs over Pearl Harbor and fire over London would stretch into years of brutal struggle, yet within that struggle was planted the seed of victory. For the alliance between Britain and America, this was not just survival, it was the forging of a destiny that would Change the 20th century. Picture the Pacific first. In the wake of Pearl Harbor, America thirsts for revenge. Soldiers train, fleets rebuild, factories thunder with production. Within months, aircraft carriers that survive the attack become the spearhead of a new strategy. At the Battle of Midway in June 1942, just half a year after the darkest dawn, American pilots strike a blow so fierce it shifts the balance of the Pacific. 4 Japanese carriers are sent to the ocean floor, their fiery deaths a grim echo of the Arizona's destruction. Suddenly, the tide that once rushed toward Japan's favor begins to turn. What was thought impossible at Pearl Harbor now seems within reach. Victory through resilience. Meanwhile, in Europe, Britain stands stronger with American aid. Convoys, once decimated by U-boats, now sail with better escorts, radar, and aircraft patrols. London still bears scars, but the Luftwaffe has lost its grip on the skies. And together, Britain and America strike north into Africa. Operation Torch in 1942 marks the first time American troops fight side by side with British forces on the ground. In the deserts of North Africa, they clash with Rommel's seasoned Afrika Korps. At first, the Americans stumble, green troops learning hard lessons under fire, but soon, their strength and numbers overwhelm even the Desert Fox. The alliance begins to show its power not just in words, but in battle. Imagine being a British soldier in the desert, the sand stinging your eyes, the sun merciless overhead. You see new allies beside you, young Americans with fresh uniforms and eager eyes. At first you doubt them. Can they endure the heat, the fear, the relentless attacks? But then, in the roar of battle, you see them stand their ground, their rifles steady, their courage unwavering. Slowly, respect grows, and with it, a bond that will carry across every battlefield of the war. On the home fronts, the war consumes daily life. In Britain, ration lines stretch long, but spirits remain stubbornly unbroken. Families gather around radios to hear Churchill's steady words, his voice a lighthouse in the storm. In America, factories work around the clock, the rhythm of hammers and machines as constant as a heartbeat. Women weld steel, men too old for battle guard the home front. Children collect scrap metal and plant victory gardens. The war is everywhere, but so is determination. And in the highest councils, strategy evolves. Churchill and Roosevelt meet again and again, their conferences shaping the road to victory. They argue, they compromise, but always they emerge united. Plans are laid for an invasion of Europe, a return to the continent that Hitler has chained under tyranny. But they know it will not come quickly. First Africa, then Italy, then, when the time is right, the greatest gamble of all. Normandy. Now, imagine the ordinary people of London in 1943. The worst of the Blitz has passed, but new dangers arise. V-1 flying bombs, V-2 rockets, terror from the skies without warning. You hear the drone of a V-1 engine cut off, and you know the silence that follows means death. Streets vanish in eruptions of dust and fire. Yet people sweep the rubble, rebuild walls, and carry on. Defiance is no longer a word. It is a way of life. And across the Atlantic, Pearl Harbor remains in memory, but not in despair. The harbor, once a graveyard of battleships, now teems with new vessels. Carriers, destroyers, submarines, ships of a new navy that will steam across the Pacific. Men who survived December 7th return with determination burning in their eyes. The ghosts of that morning sail with them, guiding their fury into every battle fought from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima. As the alliance strengthens, the Axis begins to falter. In Stalingrad, the German army is shattered by Soviet resistance and the brutal winter. In North Africa, Rommel retreats. In Italy, Mussolini falls, his people turning against him. The fortress of tyranny begins to crack, stone by stone. And always in the background, the alliance grows stronger, preparing for the day when the final blow will be struck. Then comes June 6, 1944, D-Day. Imagine standing on the deck of a landing craft, the cold spray of the channel hitting your face, the horizon filled with ships as far as the eye can see. British, American, Canadian, and more, all united, all moving as one. The ramp drops, the guns roar, and history surges forward. This is the moment Churchill dreamed of on the night of Pearl Harbor, the moment Roosevelt envisioned in his speech of infamy. The alliance born in fire now storms the shores of Normandy to tear down Hitler's fortress. London hears the news with tears and cheers. Pearl Harbor survivors remember their fallen comrades, knowing this is the path their sacrifice opened. The darkest dawn has led to the brightest hope, the liberation of Europe. Yet even in triumph, the cost is unbearable. Beaches are stained with sacrifice, cities burn in battle, and families across the world grieve. Victory grows nearer, but it demands everything. And in the Pacific, the war rages still. The island-hopping campaign brings relentless battles, each one costly, each one bringing America closer to Japan. London's skies grow quieter, but Tokyo's skies soon fill with fire. By 1945, the war nears its end, yet the memory of Pearl Harbor remains sharp. The symbol of why it all began. So, does the dawn of fire lead to the twilight of tyranny? The answer comes in the spring of 1945. Hitler is gone, his empire in ruins. London's bells ring out in victory. Churchill's voice breaks with emotion as he tells his people the war in Europe is over. Across the Atlantic, Roosevelt does not live to see the day he passes just weeks before the surrender. But his legacy stands, carved into history alongside the courage of those who rose when the dawn was darkest. And in the Pacific, Japan fights on until the very end. The war ends only with a force no one had ever seen before the atomic bomb. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the final surrender. The fire that began at Pearl Harbor ends with a fire brighter and deadlier than any the world had known. But through it all, one truth remains. The alliance of Britain and America, born in despair, forged in courage, and tested in fire, brought about the twilight of tyranny. And though millions suffered, though countless lives were lost, the world that emerged was reshaped by their unity. So when you look back at that darkest dawn, when America burned at Pearl Harbor and Britain endured in London, remember this: out of the silence, out of the screams, out of the fire, came the strength that ended the war. And though history will forever mourn the cost, it will also forever honor the courage of those who faced the darkest dawn and brought forth a new day.